Good morning. I am absolutely privileged to be here with you. And I really appreciate the IITAP team, the IITAP board, for the energy that they put into this conference every year. I think it's almost incomprehensible if you think of the countless hours that are put into organizing this meeting. So I want to thank the IITAP board and the whole IITAP team. And I want to thank you for being here today. The topic that I'm addressing today is how to rebuild trust after sexual betrayal. We're still looking for a couple of technical things so you can follow along with the presentation. But what I would like you to do, if you've got a phone, I'd like you to go. You can actually follow along with me on your phone until we get it going. So we have, I'm going to give you a web address if you have a phone that has Wi-Fi or you have a connection. So if you would go for a second, if you'll go to swipe, SWIPE, .to /9204 GC. So swipe.to /9204 GC. Do I need to say that one more time? Swipe.to /9204 GC. All right, so while we're waiting for that to come up, there you go, right there. You can now see it if you're looking for it. Are we there? All right. Now, one of the things that this presentation is interactive. So now that you're there, you can actually help me with a poll. Many years ago, I was sitting feeling very truthfully inadequate as a therapist. Now, I've been to 9.5 years of college, but I was sitting down with an individual who was in incredible trauma, and her husband were looking for help. But as a therapist, when clients are in high trauma and their spouse is embedded or involved in an addiction, one of the most difficult things to do is to help them understand the process of recovery. Now, for many of these individuals, they have been dealing with this for, in my research, many, many years. Sometimes, when I talk about years, I'm talking about 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years that as a couple they've been dealing with sexual betrayal in some version. I've spent the last 15 to 20 years of my career learning how to help couples who are stuck, who aren't moving forward. It has been a journey and it has not been easy. In fact, even as a professional, I have much to learn. But I can tell you that there is a pathway to healing. And today I want to share with you some of the core things I've learned over the last 15 to 20 years. Now, if you're following along on your phone, you'll be able to see that I'm going to be moving the screen. So if you're not going to be able to see it up here, but you are going to be able to see it on your phones. Is everyone seeing it on their phones, or right? Are we able to see the changes? So the title of my topic today is Rebuilding Trust After Sexual Betrayal. I'm going to be talking about 3 phases that couples go through. So as we go through these 3 phases that couples go through, I'm going to be talking about the first phase. And again, apparently it's not, we're having difficulty getting it up there. So if you can find it on your phones, it will be with you there. So the 3 phases, the first is the painful truth of discovery. And in this first phase, one of the things that we have to come to realize is that many couples, even Religious leaders and professionals struggle in this first phase of recovery. How do we respond? How do we support? How do we help? And many times we misunderstand each other. Second, we're going to be talking about this concept of, well, maybe we can heal. But what does that look like? We'll be talking about that. And then third, I'm going to close with how we learn to love at a deeper level, which in my opinion is the most important aspect of healing and recovery. So, number one, the painful truth of discovery. If you're on your phone, you should now be able to see a question that I pose. Did your mom and dad teach you how to have a healthy marriage, how to have a healthy relationship? Please, if you would right now, if you would be willing to vote, if you're following along. Did your mom and dad teach you how to have a healthy relationship? Did they teach you how to do this? Right now we're looking at 146, 140, 150 votes. And if you look at your response, I just want to, can you see the results on your screen? Now, if you're looking at your screen, you're realizing that of those who are here today, that 110 of you, 111 as we continue, 111 you did not have the example of a healthy marriage growing up. You didn't have moms and dads who taught you. And for the 55 who responded in the affirmative yes, that means that you had some kind of a model. But even having a model doesn't mean that you know how to do it in marriage when you're there yourself. But I just want you to imagine that now we're up to 115 and 57 thinking about this. I just want you to think about this with me for a second. Where did we learn how to have a healthy relationship? Okay, great. They're working on getting that up, but it appears that many of you, if not most of you, have access to the presentation. So I'm just going to continue moving forward, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, then we're just grateful that you're here. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. Now, I want to build off of this. If we didn't, and if these numbers are accurate, then that means about a third of you had a family where mom and dad who taught you how to have a healthy marriage. That means that 2/3 of you didn't. I didn't. If I was answering this question right now, my answer would have been no. My parents divorced when I was age 8. So I had to learn how to be in marriage. And quite frankly, I'm still learning. Just ask my wife. All right, now if you'll follow with me. When you think of how you interact with your spouse today, now if you're not married, think about maybe your parents' marriage, or think about how you interact with people. When you think of how you interact with your spouse, which of these best fits your current behaviors, the interactions that you have in your relationship? And now we're going to go back to a poll, and it looks like you guys are humming along ahead of me. All right, the question is, are you more patient with your spouse, or are you more intolerant? Now, I would like to have a continuum here, but just do a heart check real quick. Do this heart check. Am I patient with my spouse? Am I patient with the anger of betrayal? Am I patient when there's secrets or there's silence or I don't know where you're at? So right now we're reporting some patience, and we're reporting some intolerance. For those of you who are feeling intolerant, welcome to the club. And what I mean by that is pretty normal. And especially in the beginning phase after discovery of sexual betrayal and some version, one of the first things that we learn is we go into what's called the fight, flight, or freeze stage. And in this early phase, right after discovery, one of the most common things that occurs is we pull back. In other words, we're not as loving as we normally would be. We don't judge it. We come to understand it. So the first phase after sexual betrayal, there's a lot of distance, and I'll be talking about that. Next, are we honest or do we hold secrets? Are we honest? Do we hold secrets? And now as we're voting, our voting's coming in. And this is really an individual response. A person who's been betrayed, are they honest with their pain? Not their own misbehavior, but are they honest with the pain? Can they say, I am hurting? Or I am afraid, I am scared? That too is a form of honesty in a relationship. So if you want to see the results, you can follow there. Now we're going to move on. Am I comforting or am I insensitive? Do I know how to comfort my spouse? Or am I somewhat insensitive? As we get the votes coming in, am I comforting? Do I know how to be with you? Am I angry at you and so I don't know how to comfort, or don't even want to comfort? And if we view the results, maybe we're having a little bit more difficult time comforting. Again, you can now see the results on your screen. And really what this does is it tells us kind of where we're really at. And I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, just don't judge yourself. If you find yourself in the insensitive, no, I'm not comforting, if you find yourself there, please understand that this is a phase of recovery. Am I compassionate, or have I grown to apathy where I just don't care anymore? I'm worn out. I'm just tired of what we're dealing with. Now, I appreciate all of your honesty. This is an interactive presentation looking at what you're really experiencing. And what we discover from each other is that as individuals, couples, whether you're a religious leader trying to help people, I need you to understand the first phase of recovery is very, very, very painful. When we're a religious leader, when we're a therapist, when we are a spouse, after discovery, the first responses are like this. If you're looking at your screen, this is the expression that we most often get. I get some laughs out there, so I know you're seeing the screen. Okay? Oh, wow. Okay, we're here. This is the most common response. And how we respond to this is significant in determining the long-term outcome. As a therapist, I've learned the first phase is I have to understand the pain of the person in trauma, and I have to understand the suffering of the person struggling with addiction. The person trapped in addiction has their own suffering, and often we focus on addiction recovery, but really what we need to be focusing on is the suffering of both parties. What usually happens after sexual betrayal is a great divide. The trust has been broken. If we were looking at this, we would see that divide of two people who no longer understand each other. They feel empty, isolated, lonely, scared. And what happens in most situations is that these individuals, let's see if we're going to get me on here for a second. Am I here? I'm not. Okay. What happens with most couples, and I'm going to teach you a first principle of healing, is that the couples have to orient. And right now, it appears that we're not moving forward with this. Maybe we are now. There we go. This right here is called orientation. What is this elk doing? By the way, I got elk hunters with me today. Anyone who likes to watch and observe wildlife? All right. So what you're going to see here is an elk. And if you look at this elk, it's actually staring at something. It's what we call orienting. After discovery of sexual betrayal, it would be best if everybody would stop and orient. In other words, we slow down the process. Not do we quickly run for the divorce papers. Not do we quickly say, okay, I'm going to fight, and we get into yelling and screaming, belittling, putting down. What we understand when we orient is we don't expect a whole lot from each other. In the very beginning phase of recovery, the most effective response is to pause. Because our first response is to fight, flight, or freeze. In this elk, you see that it's orienting, saying, should I fight? Should I flee? Or do I freeze? Us humans, our first response is naturally to fight or to run. We would be best if we would pause and reflect on what's the best way to respond. So in the beginning phase of recovery, loving thoughts and actions are not likely the most common in marriages. So don't expect, in the first phase, don't expect it of yourself and don't expect it of your spouse. I can't tell you how many times people come in and say, well, you just need to forgive. My mom said I just need to forgive and move on. Or my religious leader said I just need to forgive and move on. I'm going to tell you, in the first phase, if you say just forgive and move on, you're probably going to harm the person who's been betrayed. We don't talk forgiveness until we understand the suffering. And unless we understand the suffering of both parties, in this first phase, we are most likely to make a mistake. So in the beginning phase, the first phase of recovery, the best thing we can do as people who are in it is to orient ourselves. And that means we understand our situation. Going back to that elk, it's understanding its situation. How should I respond now? The next thing that I've discovered is that betrayed spouses are hurting, and expecting them to offer comfort simply isn't fair. In the first phase, after discovery, asking a spouse to comfort, it's just not normal. And the reason why it's not normal is because in the first part of it is they're in trauma. And if you understand trauma, a person in trauma is not able to comfort because they're in suffering. They are in what we refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. In my research, somewhere between 70 to 80% of people who experience sexual betrayal experience post-traumatic stress symptoms. Please understand, a person in trauma isn't going to be the person reaching out and offering comfort to a person who's betrayed them. Now, I'm saying this strongly because this is what my research has found. In the beginning phase of recovery, the best solution is to seek a deeper understanding. If you're a helper, if you're a therapist, if you're a spouse, don't expect the person who's been traumatized to reach out and be warm and affectionate and loving. Instead, you're most likely in the first phase to get anger, distance, and you're more likely to get fear. This is the more common response. And if we can understand this, then we can do it without judgment. Now, this might make many people uncomfortable because maybe you've responded in a way you're like, oh, I did that. But just let me tell you that if we can orient ourselves, we orient to pain and suffering so we can help. Next, those who are stuck in addictive patterns often carry a deep level of shame, which often prevents them from being the loving person that they are capable of being. If we truly understood somebody who's struggling with addiction, as you're going to learn throughout this conference, and as we learned in the keynote session this morning, A person trapped in addiction needs as much love as can possibly be given. It's just most likely not going to start from the spouse. It could be a support group. It could be an accountability team. It could be parents. It could be a religious leader. It could be many other people who are able to offer that love in the beginning phase of recovery. So while they're dealing with their shame, the person who's stuck in addiction needs as much loving comfort as possible, not judgment. But notice what I'm talking here. I'm talking about a coupleship where one party is not really going to be nurturing and offering that love to the other. A person in shame really has a hard time giving that kind of love when their spouse is angry or hurt or dismissive. In the beginning phase, that's the normal process. So as long as questions and uncertainty remain, intimacy and healing will be limited. So let me talk for a second about this process. These questions and uncertainty, when discovery first occurs, there's many questions that have not been addressed. Like, how long has it been going on? What secrets have you had that I haven't been told yet? The discovery process usually is best done with a disclosure. A disclosure is a process where a couple prepares to have an open conversation, usually led by a therapist, to talk about the details and the history of the sexual behaviors. A disclosure done properly takes all of the secrets and brings them into the light. It means that the person who's been dealing with pornography or other sexual behaviors does a history of their sexual behaviors. They talk about their secrets and their lies, how they deceived. They own them, own up to them, and they don't hide anymore. That disclosure process is often one of the first major steps when there has been significant deceit and lying in the relationship. I had one individual come to my office. He had been preparing for his disclosure literally for a few months because he had an extensive history of sexual abuse in his childhood and sexual trauma. And he had never told his wife because he was ashamed of what had occurred to him. In the disclosure, he had done his full sexual history, and for the first time in their marriage, he told her about his early sexual abuse. She looked at him and she said, "Why in the world did you not tell me this?" And he said, "I was afraid you wouldn't marry me because I was bad." It was the turning point where she started to see him for the first time. As long as there's questions and uncertainty, intimacy and healing will be limited. So the disclosure process is an important facilitator to long-term healing and recovery. In other words, we take out that shame. We talk about that little boy's experience. We talk about that 11-year-old who is experiencing that kind of sexual experience at a premature age. And we don't run from it. We understand the suffering of that boy. As we do so, the dialogue increases, and we begin to change with what I refer to and what professionals now refer to as recovery capital. So in the beginning phase of recovery, we start to build what's called recovery capital. This is found in drug and alcohol literature, and here's what it means. Drug and alcohol literature has found that as you build the recovery capital, your chance of relapse goes down. Recovery capital includes things like social support, a recovery plan. If you're spiritual, it includes spiritual connection or reconnection with your Maker, with God, with your higher power. It includes emotional regulation, learning how to deal with your own emotions, stress. It includes having an accountability partner, having a sponsor. as you build recovery capital, then the coupleship can begin to heal, because the spouse who's been betrayed can see what their spouse is doing. In other words, you're doing the things that work. I see it, because you see this shift. As people begin to take responsibility, they call up their sponsor. They have an accountability team. And then you see them doing things like playing with the kids. And heaven forbid, doing the dishes. I see a few smiles from women out there. I know you know what I'm talking about. And it's like, wait, there's presence in this person. So as individuals go in and build the recovery capital, there is a significant shift in how they are with you. Now, as this begins to happen, we move to phase 2, and we begin to ask questions, and we're saying, well, maybe we can heal. Maybe we can do this. Well, if we can heal, what does it look like? And as we begin to ask those questions, here's what we absolutely know as truth. First of all, honesty and openness become more common. There are no more secrets. I don't need them. I don't need to hide anymore. The person in trauma is also able to say, it's been a hard day, and their spouse begins to say, instead of running into the shame, their spouse says, tell me about it. Help me understand what you're going through. And together we begin to have more openness and honesty. Next, we see these things being reduced. Anger is reduced. You start to see the shame being worked through. We stop being distant. We start to maybe like each other a little bit more. Notice I said like. We stopped acting cold. We stopped being mean. Now, mean comes in many different directions, but you see less conflict, and the criticism stops or is reduced. This is when couples start moving forward. By the way, did you notice that I said all of these things are reduced? The assumption there is pretty normal. These are normal responses to sexual betrayal. Does that make sense to everybody? These are normal responses. And as we go into recovery, both directions, the person dealing with addiction gets less angry when their spouse is angry, because they're not running into their shame. Shame comes out in anger. It comes out in denial. It comes out in blame. Those behaviors stop as couples go into the recovery process. When couples begin to understand each other's pain and hurt a little more clearly, then healing becomes a possibility. In other words, it's intimacy. They become intimate one with another. I begin to see you, and you begin to see me. That's intimacy. Now, as we progress in the recovery in phase 2, we typically see a recovery team is built. It's established. And a recovery team is generally not just a single person, it's a team. A couple of years ago when I spoke here at IITAP, I talked about accountability partners and getting an accountability team. What I was referring to there is no different today than what I'm talking about here. If you're going to succeed, most people succeed with a team around them. It usually starts with an openness to say, I need help. That might be with a religious leader, with a therapist, with a spouse, and then building that team. I cannot tell you how many people have come to me over the years, the last couple of years since I talked about accountability 2 years ago, how many people talked about having a wingman. Both people need a wingman. The person in trauma also benefits from having a voice, having somebody who they can talk to about their experiences. I had a lady I was talking to not long ago. She came up to me and she said, I didn't really think I needed someone to talk to until one day I was triggered beyond anything I'd experienced in many months, and I was ready to rip his head off, her words. And she said, I realized that if I did that, it would take us back a long ways. So I picked up the phone and I called my friend. And my friend talked me off the cliff. And she said, I realized my trigger was not in accordance with his behavior. And for me to yell at him at that moment was my issue, not his. I've found over the years that both parties need a second brain. In other words, in addiction, I can't use my own brain because it's wired for addiction. If I'm in trauma, because my natural response is to yell, I'm anxious, I'm not sleeping, it's helpful to get that second person's brain to help me regulate my emotions when I can't do it by myself. Some people have a great spiritual power that they turn to help them get that second brain. If you have that connection, please use it. We need as much support as possible. Phase 3 is fun. Phase 3 is absolutely fun. When you see couples turn the corner, fun begins. And as it begins, we begin to develop a deeper understanding of our partner's pain and their hurts, and we don't run from it. We don't run from it, we sit with it, and we understand it. Because all of a sudden, there are no more secrets. There are no hidden behaviors. And as couples go through this process, you begin to hear them say things like, we were talking the other night about something we never talked about before. Or, we started talking about our story and where we were 3 years ago or 5 years ago when quite frankly, we had a poor marriage. And we're learning how to be with each other now. We're learning how to talk. In fact, there was one day where we were talking and our kids said, would you guys just stop? All you do is talk. Well, Mom and Dad love each other. And we haven't always been this way. We're finally learning how to love at a deeper level. The most important rule to healing and recovery is what? Over all my experiences, there's one simple principle that we've already been taught today, and it's this. It's that we learn how to apply love for self and others. I need you to understand what that means in full context. A person stuck in addiction is so deeply entrenched in their shame that it's almost impossible for them to feel a sense of love for self. If you truly look at that concept, we could go clear back historically into the Bible, and we could see in Genesis that God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they were naked, and they were not ashamed. And after partaking of the fruit, the first emotional response that we get from them is this statement, and they were ashamed. That might mean that one of the deepest, darkest emotions we can feel is shame. When we come out into the light and say, yes, I took of that apple, I did partake, and we own it, we don't have to sit in the shame anymore. When we own our stuff that has been hidden in the darkest recesses or corners of our lives, we can own it and say, that was me. I did that. So learning to love ourselves is essential for both parties' healing. If you want to go to the other side, I can tell you that a woman in trauma or a man in trauma who's been sexually betrayed, they often say things like, I'm not enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not tall enough, I wasn't skinny enough, I wasn't sexy enough, I was not enough. Or they come up with a belief that I'm unlovable. In other words, both parties feel unlovable and they're like they're not enough. The two great commandments are that we love God and that we love our neighbor with one inherent assumption that says what? That we should love our neighbor as ourselves. Think about what that means. It's assumed that we're going to like ourselves. We don't heal without love. And that begins with self. And I'm not talking pride and I'm not talking arrogance. I'm talking about a godly love. And that godly love says that you are worth it. That nothing can separate us from that love. The greatest healing comes when we learn to love at the deepest levels. And that starts with ourselves. And then it transitions into the people around us. So the deepest healing comes when we learn to love ourselves and the others around us. So what happens when we are kind? What happens when we are patient? What happens when we're forgiving? What happens when we're honest and comforting, friendly? What happens when we believe in our spouse and we lift them up and we invite them into our world? The healing and recovery process begins. And simply said, we are loving. Now, some of you may be thinking, yeah, that's really cute. Love. You're sitting there talking about love, and I'm still in phase 1. No, thank you. If you're in phase 1, it's okay. Just not today. But if two people are working on recovery, I promise you this day can come. I've seen it over and over. And what are you really fighting for? You're fighting for generations of time. You're fighting for children who need parents to love them. And I promise you, it's worth it. But for goodness sakes, if 2/3 of you didn't learn how to love from your parents, you didn't learn how to have a marriage, don't beat yourselves up. Just simply go to the drawing board and say, okay, that wasn't a good model, but where is my model? And find it. And apply true principles. You don't have to sit in the muck. You don't have to sit in the gunk any longer. It's not worth it. It's time for us to stand up and be who we can really be. Be that loving person. That's what we were designed to be. I love it when betrayed spouses, they come to me and they say, I'm not going to let that anger dominate me anymore. In fact, I'm going to be the loving person that I really am. So get out of the way. Because I'm a loving being. And I'm not going to reject that part of me anymore. I'm not going to live in fear. And when the addict says, no way, I'm not this shame-based person. I'm not going to live in the shame. I'm a lovable being. And their children get a loving dad that's been missing. That's what I'm talking about. Love, lest you misunderstand, I'm going to define love in a very interesting way. This comes from Barbara Fredrickson. She says, love, as you'll see, is not lasting. Oh, man, that's great to know. Okay, love's not lasting. It's actually far more fleeting than most of us would care to acknowledge. On the upside, though, love is forever renewable. And perhaps most challenging of all, love is not unconditional. We expect unconditional love. I guarantee you, when you've experienced betrayal trauma, the last thing you're feeling is this concept of love. You still might love the person, but you're not being loving. And that's okay. The person trapped in addiction, I promise you, you're not being loving the way you can be. When we truly understand love, it's going to ebb and it's going to flow. And I can choose to love this moment, this second with you right now. And you can choose to do that back with me. Love is a choice, and we make it every moment of every day. It doesn't emerge no matter what, regardless of conditions. Actually, to the contrary, you'll see that the love your body craves and is exquisitely sensitive to is contextual cues. It's the smile. It's the rub on the back. It's the time where it's unsolicited, where you say to your spouse, I am so sorry I hurt you. I made a mistake, and it's damaged our relationship. It's the unsolicited, I appreciate the work you're doing on your recovery. And once we understand those preconditions, you can find love countless times each day. We create it. So, as I get ready to close today, what does love sound like in couples working towards healing and recovery? I'm just going to give you a couple examples. I was sitting in a meeting a couple weeks ago, and I was actually done with this presentation. And then I was sitting in that meeting, and I thought, oh man, I'm not done. And so I recreated a whole new section of this class, of this presentation. So this is actually part 2. If you want access to part 1, I'll give it to you. I recorded it last week. It'll be a free resource to anybody who wants it. But here's what I found. If somebody hasn't taught you how to love, I'm going to teach you 3 or 4 core principles of how we love in trauma. Okay? So here's behaviors associated with patience. So when your partner's upset, if you're dealing with addiction, you don't run from their anger. You might want to go into your shame, but you don't have to. You don't have to. Instead, you can listen intently because they are hurting. And they are hurting because of your behaviors. And so instead of running, we're patient with them. What we might refer to as long-suffering. And if we've been betrayed, patience might look like this. I understand it may be hard for you to overcome this, whatever the this is. But if you are working toward recovery, I'm going to keep trying too. Now, what that does is it cements a commitment to the relationship. When you observe couples who are succeeding, they've cemented a commitment level. I'm in. I might not be perfectly in, but I'm trying my best to be in. Next, the actions and words associated with honesty. I will be open and honest in my recovery. No more secrets, no more hidden behaviors. I will live a life of integrity. I will live a WYSIWYG life. Okay, if you're not familiar with WYSIWYG, it's a computer term. What you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. That's who I am. What you're going to see is what you're going to get. That's me. No more secrets, no more hidden behaviors. It's an honest life of integrity. And if you've been betrayed, my honesty is to let you know when I'm hurting. I too will evaluate my life and choose to live more fully with my truths. I too make mistakes, and I'm going to seek to overcome my wounds. This is a commitment that couples are making to each other. Now, I want to just share something with you, lest you think that honesty might be this crazy thing. A few years ago, I included on a poll this question. Would you be willing to stay in your relationship and work through difficulties of healing and recovery if your partner stopped lying? Please look at the results. 80+% said, if my spouse is working and being honest in their healing and recovery, I'm in. They stop lying, I'm in. That's what I'm being told. That's what the research is showing. If you want to succeed, the answer's right there. The behaviors associated with comforting. I can't emphasize this enough. I will be here. I will listen to your pain. I will seek to understand how my behaviors hurt you. I will hold you if you want to be held. I will commit to my recovery and improving my quality of life so you have a spouse you can respect. That's the voice of somebody in recovery. That's what's wanted. The betrayed spouse, I want to be there for you. And I will commit to this relationship as you work on healing and recovery. I want to be close to you again, even though it may take time. I believe we can both heal. That's the voice of comfort that's both directions. Finally is compassion. Compassion manifests itself in the healing process. I seek to truly understand pain I've created in you, and I listen and I learn. I ask questions and I show genuine interest in you. Compassion is to be with people in their suffering. That's what compassion is. It means with passion, meaning suffering. So the betrayed says, I too will seek to understand your addiction, what it's like for you. As hard as it is, I too will listen and understand your suffering. What's it like having an addiction? What's it like being that little boy or that adult man who has a secret? Now, lest we judge, I want to be very clear. There are times when couples cannot heal because the hurt and pain have become too deep. To these individuals, we must not judge. I say that when two people engage in the healing process, their hearts change and they genuinely see each other for the first time or again. So here's a couple of questions you may want to ask. The spouse who's been betrayed or who is betrayed, what can I do to help my partner heal? These are questions to ponder. What can I do to heal from my issue? And can I hear my spouse's story and genuinely understand their suffering? To the spouse who's been betrayed, what information do I need to make this informed decision? In other words, you might need in more information to make a decision of whether you're going to stay or go. That's why we do a disclosure. An honest question is, do I want to reconnect? And if yes, what steps can I take to heal? Can I hear my spouse's story and genuinely understand their experiences? And can I understand what it's like living with a secret? What is it like living with a secret? It's horrible. It's painful. Now, be patient with the process. If your recovery does not improve your overall quality of life, this is a core concept. Addiction recovery and betrayal trauma recovery is not stopping the addiction and healing the betrayed trauma alone. Healing is an improvement in your overall quality of life. Your life should be improving if you're healing. The quality, the happiness, every aspect of your life you should be seeing elevated. More connections in the community, more spiritual connections, more intimacy, and I'm not talking sex, in the relationship, more connection. The deepest Individual healing occurs when we attune to our own pain and suffering. We don't run from the pain. Instead, we sit with it. We love ourselves enough to be strong, to create boundaries, and to do a thorough self-evaluation. And then we conclude, I will love, and I will be loved. A question you might ask yourself is, do I make it easy to love me? The deepest couple healing occurs when we are attuned to our beloved. We don't run from their suffering. Instead, we sit with them. We hold them. We offer them our hearts and refuse to let outside distractions prevent us from truly seeing who they really are. And in closing, C.S. Lewis said, "It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses. To remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. Or else a whore or a corruption, such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another. All friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals, whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal whores or everlasting splendors. It is my hope, my prayer, that we will see each other as these everlasting splendors. Recovery is possible, and don't settle for anything less. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence. Excellence in marriage. Excellence in recovery. Excellence in our healing. That's what we're pursuing. It is an act that is continuously done to create a habit. Excellence is a habit. I want to say thank you very much. If you would like, if you're following on your app, you can then find part 1 of this presentation. It's about a 50-minute presentation where I do more nuts and bolts of healing and recovery. You have free access to it at this on your website that you've been on. I want to thank you so much for being here. And honestly, from my heart, I pray that we will all stand up and fight the fight. We have to be more loving people. The world needs it, and it needs it from us. And you're here today. Let it start with you, and let it end by spreading it to the people around you. Thank you very much.